There's a moment in every investigation, one specific moment where everything you thought you understood stops making sense. Where the neat, clean story the headlines are selling develops a crack. And then another, and then the crack splits wide open, and underneath it, you find something so specific, so layered, and so uncomfortably close to home that your brain resists accepting it. I had that moment in this case at 2:12 a.m., not at 1:47 a.m., when the doorbell camera went dark, not at 2:28 a.m., when the pacemaker monitoring app lost its signal, which means an 84-year-old Nancy Guthrie was no longer in the house where her heart medication sat untouched on the nightstand. At 2:12 a.m., because at 2:12 a.m., nay, 25 minutes after that camera was manually ripped from its mount, while the neighborhood of Catalina foothills slept in its usual prehistoric silence, a motion sensor inside Nancy Guthrie's home activated. Something was moving inside that house. And whatever or whoever was moving in there was not Nancy Guthrie going to get a glass of water. Nancy Guthrie was already gone by 2:28, which means between 2:12 and 2:28 a.m., someone was inside that house finishing something, cleaning something, taking something, or making sure something could never be found. 16 minutes. That is all the time they needed once the cameras were dark. I want you to hold that image in your mind as I take you through everything I found in this case. Because this is not the story you have been reading in the headlines. The headlines are telling you about a missing grandmother, a famous daughter, a horrifying tragedy. All of that is true. But what the headlines are not telling you, what nobody seems willing to say plainly and directly, is that the evidence in this case does not point outward toward a stranger in the shadows. It points inward, toward a dinner table, toward a 4-hour window, toward a man who was standing on Nancy Guthrie's porch, the same night he sat in her daughter's living room playing family games. My name does not matter. What matters is that I went through every press conference, every court file, every verified report, every leaked detail, and every piece of publicly available evidence I could find. I cross-referenced timelines, I mapped the geography, I read the behavioral analysis from former federal agents and criminal profilers. I read a published book that made me put it down and stare at the ceiling for a full minute. And then I came here to show you what I found. Because by the time this is over, I promise you one thing. The question you're going to walk away with is not who did this. The question is going to be something far harder to sit with. How did someone who knew this family so well, who was trusted so completely, who had been walking through that front door for nearly 2 decades, how did they look Nancy Guthrie in the eye, drive her home, and come back 4 hours later? Before we talk about what happened, I need you to understand who Nancy Guthrie really is, not as a headline, as a person. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. She is a retired educator. She has lived in the same house in the Catalina foothills of Tucson, Arizona since 1985, 41 years in the same home she built her life around. She has a pacemaker regulating her heart. She takes daily medication she cannot miss without serious physical risk. She is not famous. She never sought the spotlight. But her daughter, Savannah Guthrie, is one of the most recognized names in American morning television. Co-anchor of the Today Show on NBC, with a net worth estimated at $40 million and an annual salary the entire internet apparently knows, because someone in Tucson, Arizona, Googled it in December 2025. We will come back to that. What I want you to understand about Nancy's life before February 1st is this. She lived alone. She was independent. She was not paranoid. She had no reason to be. She had lived in that quiet desert neighborhood for 4 decades without incident. She trusted the people she trusted because they had given her no reason not to. Her cameras, she had a Nest doorbell system, and additional cameras on the property, were running locally. She did not pay for the cloud subscription. That means the footage was being saved on the physical device, not uploaded to a remote server. If the device was destroyed, the footage was gone. Someone knew that. I want to say that again, because it matters enormously. Whoever entered Nancy Guthrie's home on February 1st knew she did not have a paid cloud subscription. And they knew those cameras were not backing up footage to a server somewhere beyond the reach of a physical assault. They knew that destroying the camera would destroy the evidence. You do not find that out from a Google search. You do not find that out by driving past a house. You find that out by being inside that house, by being part of the conversations about the monthly bill she decided not to pay, by being family. That detail alone separates this crime from a random predator doing general research. A stranger might know a house has cameras. Only someone close knows those cameras are essentially blind the moment the power's cut. I want to start 9 days before the disappearance, because this is where most people begin watching this case from the wrong direction. Everyone is focused on February 1st. But the person who took Nancy Guthrie did not begin their work on February 1st. They began on January 23rd. On the night of January 23rd, 2026, a homeowner in the Catalina Foothills neighborhood of Tucson posted a video to the Ring Neighbors app, the community security network where residents share footage of suspicious activity. The video showed a figure approaching a residential driveway late at night, but not approaching normally, walking backward, not stumbling, not disoriented, not lost, moving in a slow, measured, perfectly controlled reverse, back flat toward the camera angle, chin tucked toward his chest, every step deliberate. This person was not walking backward because they did not know where they were going. They were walking backward because they understood exactly how the camera watching them worked. Here's the technical reality behind that choice. Ring and Nest cameras are not running continuously. They are motion activated, meaning a passive infrared sensor has to detect heat and movement before the device wakes up, adjusts to the available light, and establishes a data connection with the recording server. That process takes 1 to 2 seconds. When a person approaches a camera walking forward, those first seconds record their face closing in on the lens, exactly the footage you need to identify someone. When a person approaches walking backward, those first seconds record the back of a jacket. It's happened by the time the lens is fully active and recording clearly. The face is already inside the blind angle. The camera has been physically defeated using nothing but the geometry of a human body and a working knowledge of consumer technology lag time. This is not instinct. This is not panic. This is someone who sat down, researched how these cameras function, and built a method to defeat them without any equipment at all. Now, this house on January 23rd is 6.5 miles from Nancy Guthrie's home. The same neighborhood zone, the same Catalina Foothills geography, the same dark sky ordinance, which means almost no street lighting, deep natural darkness, and the same visual conditions that would exist at the target location 9 days later. Notice the Ozark Trail 25-liter hiker backpack this figure is wearing on January 23rd, with its distinctive reflective safety strips along the shoulder straps, is visually identical to the backpack worn by the intruder at Nancy Guthrie's front door on February 1st. Same bag, 6.5 miles away, 9 days earlier. In forensic geography, what this person chose on January 23rd is called a buffer zone selection, a practice site far enough from the real target to avoid immediate connection if anything goes wrong, but close enough to replicate the precise conditions of the real environment. He was not testing a random house. He was simulating Nancy's house. He was running the operation in rehearsal. A dog barked that night. He fled. But he fled still walking backward, suppressing the most basic biological reflex a human being has, the reflex to turn toward a sudden sound, because he refused to let even one frame of his face reach that camera. That level of self-control, under pressure, does not come from fear. It comes from someone who had already decided the cost of being identified was greater than any physical risk. Someone with something very specific to protect. 9 days later, he arrived at Nancy Guthrie's home, and he did not walk backward. He walked forward, calmly, without hesitation, and he reached up and tapped the camera lens twice, light, rhythmic, casual, like someone tapping a familiar piece of furniture as they pass it in their own home. The only thing that changed between January 23rd and February 1st was this. He posted the dress rehearsal footage himself, or monitored it after someone else did. And when no police showed up at his door the next morning, he understood something that no criminal ever wants to learn. He understood he was invisible. The community's own safety network became his testing ground. The platform we used to protect our neighborhoods became his feedback loop. And that feedback told him he was ready. Stop right here for 1 second. I want you to think about this. This person did not stumble into this crime. They rehearsed it. They researched camera technology. They selected a practice site matching the target environment. They suppressed their own biological reflexes to protect their identity. The question I want you to answer in the comments right now, before we go any further, is simple. Does this look like the work of a random stranger who picked an elderly woman's house at random? Or does the level of preparation you just heard suggest someone who knew exactly where they were going and exactly whose door they were going to knock on 9 days later? Drop your answer. I read everything. On the evening of January 31st, 2026, Nancy Guthrie had dinner at her daughter's home. Her daughter Annie lives with her husband, Tommaso Cioni, approximately 4 miles from Nancy's house. In Tucson at 2 in the morning, that is a 10-minute drive. On a quiet desert night, maybe less. The evening was described by those present as routine, a family dinner, board games, the unremarkable rhythm of people who love each other spending time together. The kind of night that does not stay in memory because nothing about it seemed like it would be the last one. And then the evening ended. And this is where the investigation develops its first fracture. Who drove Nancy home? That question sounds simple. It has no simple answer. Multiple sources across multiple rounds of reporting have given multiple conflicting responses. Some accounts say Tommaso drove Nancy home alone. Some say Annie drove her. Some say both of them made the trip together. The accounts have shifted depending on who is telling the story and when they are being asked. As of the time of this video, there is no single confirmed, consistent, publicly verified answer to the question of who was the last person to physically place Nancy Guthrie inside her home on the night of January 31st. In a criminal investigation, that kind of inconsistency around the final moments of a victim's confirmed safety is not a minor administrative confusion. The last person to see the victim alive is always the first person the investigation examines. The account of what happened at that front door, who touched it, who was present, what was said when the vehicle pulled away. That is foundational information. And it keeps changing. What is consistent across the reporting is the time. Nancy was returned to her home and confirmed safely inside at approximately 9:50 p.m. At 1:47 a.m., her Nest doorbell camera was manually disconnected. That is 3 hours and 57 minutes. Call it 4 hours. And I want to walk you through what 4 hours means when you live 10 minutes away. The person who drove Nancy home, whoever it was, could have been back at their own residence by 10 o'clock. By 11, the Catalina foothills would be silent. Not quiet, silent. By midnight, the streets of that neighborhood are empty. By 1 in the morning, the darkness in a dark sky ordnance zone, no streetlights, no ambient glow, is complete. 4 hours is enough time to drive home, sit in a quiet house, wait for the neighborhood to fall fully asleep, change clothes, put on a mask, pack a bag, drive back toward a different route, park at a safe distance, walk to the house, and execute every step of a plan you have already rehearsed 9 days earlier. 4 hours is not a tight window. 4 hours is an eternity. And in those 4 hours, no independent, third-party, forensically verifiable alibi for Tommaso Cioni has been made public. Not one. What exists is a household alibi. A spouse confirming a spouse's presence. Two people who live together, who share a bed, who would each confirm the other's whereabouts by default, regardless of what actually occurred. That is not an alibi. That is proximity. And investigators know the difference. At 1:47 a.m. on February 1st, the Nest doorbell camera at Nancy Guthrie's home was physically disabled. Not by a power outage, not by a technical glitch. No, manually. A gloved hand reached up and ripped the device from its mounting bracket. But the camera had already begun its upload cycle. Before the physical connection was severed, Google's back-end servers had pulled a final burst of residual data, the last frames the device captured before it went dark. Those frames became the most analyzed 44 seconds of footage in America. What those frames show is not what a stranger on an unfamiliar porch looks like. Former federal agents and behavioral analysts who reviewed the footage publicly described the suspect's movement in specific language. He does not arrive at the camera. He arrives at a location he already knows. He walks directly to the exact position of the doorbell mount without scanning, without searching, without hesitating. He knows where it is before he reaches the top step, and he uses vegetation from Nancy's own front yard, plants he either knew were there or accessed without any visible searching, to obstruct the lens before disabling it. He maneuvers the potted plant near the entrance with the ease of someone who has moved it before. And then there is the tap. 2 light, rhythmic taps on the camera lens. I have watched this moment many times. It is not a taunt. It is not a calculated gesture for the recording. It is the kind of habitual physical contact you make with an object that is part of your daily environment. The kind of motion your hand makes without your brain issuing a specific instruction. The way you might tap a kitchen counter as you walk past it, or a railing you check every time you climb a certain staircase, or a camera you have been passing for years without thinking about it. Body language specialists have a name for the behavioral state this type of movement reveals. They call it ownership behavior, a psychological condition in which the perpetrator does not experience themselves as an intruder. They experience themselves as someone with a legitimate right to be in that space. They do not move like someone committing a crime in a stranger's home. They move like someone performing a routine task in a familiar one. There was no forced entry at Nancy Guthrie's home, no broken glass, no damaged door frame, no marks of a crowbar or a pry tool. The intruder engaged the handle and the door opened. Either the door was unlocked in a foothills neighborhood at 2 in the morning, or the person on that porch had a key. Who knew where every camera on that property was positioned? Who knew Nancy did not have an active cloud subscription? Who knew the exact location of the potted plants? Who had the kind of subconscious muscle memory familiarity with that porch that would produce that habitual tap? Tommaso Cioni had been walking through Nancy Guthrie's front door for nearly 2 decades of marriage to her daughter. He helped with property maintenance. He assisted with errands. He was embedded in the daily logistics of her home. The layout of her porch, the position of her cameras, the location of her plants. These were not mysteries to him. They were the background scenery of a life he had been part of for 20 years. And he was standing on that porch, according to his own account to investigators, approximately 4 hours before the camera was ripped from its mount. I want you to think about something before we continue, and I want a real answer in the comments. We have a suspect on a porch who moves like he owns the space, who knows where every camera is, who taps the lens like it is furniture in his living room, who opens a door without forcing it. And we have a man who, by his own account, was at that same house 4 hours earlier. I am not handing you a verdict, but I am asking you this. If a stranger had never been to that house before, could they move through it the way this person did? Is that physically possible? Tell me what you think in the comments. Be specific, because the answer to that question might be the most important one in this entire case. Let me tell you who Tommaso Cioni is, because the public narrative has reduced him to either a monster or a victim of the internet, and neither of those is a complete picture. Tommaso Cioni is 50 years old. He was born in San Giovanni Valdarno, a small town in Tuscany, Italy. He moved to Arizona in 2006. He has taught advanced placement biology at a charter school in Tucson for over 15 years. He plays bass in a local band called Early Black. He makes pasta by hand. He forages for mushrooms. He is, in the words of his wife Annie, in a 2013 published interview, her greatest teacher, a man she described as a great manifester who writes poetry with his lifestyle. By every public-facing account, he is a quiet, creative, deeply community-embedded man living an unremarkable life in the desert. He is also the last confirmed person to see Nancy Guthrie alive. His home is 4 miles from the crime scene. He had dinner with the victim the night she vanished. His wife's car was impounded by investigators. His home was searched at minimum 5 to 6 times by FBI agents and Pima County Sheriff's deputies. His septic tank was probed. His security cameras were removed from his property, and federal agents were documented on camera leaving his house carrying a brown paper grocery bag. Let me explain what a paper bag means in a criminal investigation. It is not used for documents. It is not used for general evidence. Paper bags are used for biological evidence, for material containing skin cells, sweat, saliva, hair, blood, because placing biological material in a plastic bag traps moisture, which cultivates mold, which literally consumes and destroys DNA. Paper allows the genetic material to breathe. It preserves the biological signature all the way to the laboratory. The FBI used a paper bag because whatever they removed from Tommaso Cioni's house, they believed it was alive with DNA. Now let us talk about the gloves. The intruder on Nancy Guthrie's porch was wearing black nitrile gloves. Not leather tactical gloves, not latex surgical gloves. Nitrile. The synthetic rubber gloves used in laboratories, food service, home repair, and mechanical work because they resist chemical degradation and provide fine motor sensitivity. A pack of 100 nitrile gloves costs approximately $10. They are standard, disposable, and unremarkable in most working environments. They are also the standard glove used in every biology laboratory in America. Tommaso Cioni runs AP biology labs where students handle specimens, dissection materials, chemicals, and biological samples. A box of black nitrile gloves is not a suspicious item in his home. It is expected. It is professional equipment that any biology teacher would have on hand. That ordinariness is precisely what makes it significant in this investigation. The gloves are not unusual enough to constitute hard evidence on their own. But when a black nitrile glove is found discarded on the roadside less than 2 miles from Nancy Guthrie's home, along a route consistent with a post-crime exit, and the FBI simultaneously removes a paper bag of biological evidence from the home of the AP biology teacher who was at the crime scene 4 hours before the crime, the ordinariness of those gloves stops being a defense. It becomes a connection. Then Ashley Banfield, a veteran investigative journalist with over 2 decades of experience covering criminal proceedings at the national level, reported on her podcast, citing a law enforcement source she specifically described as very connected and highly regarded, that Tommaso Cioni was a significant focus of this investigation. She was not speculating. She was not amplifying social media theories. She was citing a named source inside the investigation who was willing to speak specifically about the direction of the case. She also reported the impoundment of Annie Guthrie's vehicle. The sheriff later described vehicle processing as standard investigative practice. But in a criminal investigation, standard means something precise. You do not impound a family member's vehicle in a stranger abduction case. You impound a vehicle when you have reason to believe it was used in the commission of a crime, or when it may contain forensic evidence. The vehicle is impounded because the vehicle is evidence. And Megyn Kelly, who has been closely tracking this case, said something publicly that I think is the clearest summary of the investigative posture toward this household. She said, "The reason investigators keep going back to Annie and Tommaso's home is because they are wondering whether they had anything to do with it." She said she does not understand why investigators would be repeatedly interviewing neighbors, specifically asking about Annie and Tommaso and what kind of people they are, unless they are building something, a profile, a foundation, a case. You do not ask a neighborhood what kind of person someone is after you have already fully eliminated them. Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos has been at the center of every public development in this investigation. And I want to go through his statements carefully because the gap between what he said and how people interpreted it is enormous. When asked directly by reporters whether Tommaso Cioni was an active investigative focus. Sheriff Nanos said, in his own words, "We're actively looking at everybody we come across in this case. Everybody. We would be irresponsible if we didn't talk to everybody. The Uber driver, the gardener, the pool person, whoever. Everybody. It's so cliché, but everybody's still a suspect in our eyes." He did not name Tommaso. He also did not exclude him. When he placed him in the same category as every other person who crossed the investigation's path. He also confirmed that the family had been cooperative, that they had surrendered their phones, computers, vehicles, and had allowed multiple entries of their home. He praised the cooperation publicly and asked the media to stop directing harassment at the family. And on February 16th, 2026, he took the additional step of publicly clearing the entire Guthrie family, siblings and spouses included, calling them 100% cooperative and describing them as victims, plain and simple. Every major outlet ran that as the end of the family angle. The internet declared Tommaso innocent. Case closed. Here's what you need to understand about how criminal investigations actually work. Cleared does not mean exonerated. And cleared means that at this specific moment, with the current publicly confirmed evidence, there is not sufficient cause to charge or name a specific individual. Those are different things. In high-profile cases, particularly ones with the national media saturation this case carries, publicly clearing individuals is frequently a tactical decision by investigators, not a factual declaration of innocence. When a law enforcement official goes on camera and tells the world that someone is not a suspect, the natural human response is to relax, to let the guard down, to stop being careful in ways you were being careful before, to check something you had been afraid to check, to say something to someone you should not trust, to make a move you had been paralyzed from making. Clearing someone publicly can be the opening of a trap, and not the closing of an investigation. The DNA found inside Nancy Guthrie's home does not match any family member. The FBI has confirmed two separate unmatched DNA profiles, one from a glove found on the roadside, one from inside the home itself. They do not match each other. They do not match the family. They do not match anyone currently in any national database. If Tommaso was physically present during the abduction and his DNA was not found, there are three possibilities. He was extraordinarily careful, which is consistent with someone who teaches biology and understands genetic evidence and how to avoid leaving it. He was not physically present at the crime itself, which is consistent with an organizational role rather than an executive one. Or the DNA belongs to someone else entirely. No, and the real answer is still sitting in a laboratory waiting to be matched. The sheriff has not ruled out an accomplice. He has stated this publicly. 2 DNA profiles, 2 separate locations, 2 people. The mathematics of that evidence does not support a lone stranger acting on impulse. Let me walk you through what this suspect was wearing, because how you interpret this gear will determine everything about which direction you believe this case points. A ski mask costing $22 from a sporting goods store in Tucson, a desert city where it does not snow. A belly band holster worn completely wrong, designed to sit against the skin beneath clothing, but strapped over a thick jacket, flopping loose, completely useless. An Ozark Trail backpack with reflective safety strips on the straps that glow like a signal under infrared light. Black nitrile gloves. Total kit, under $100. A former Secret Service agent reviewed the footage and said plainly, "No person with even a single day of tactical training wears a firearm that way." The reflective backpack, he said, was the equivalent of wearing a neon sign in the dark. So the loudest argument from people defending Tommaso Cioni sounds like this. He is an AP biology teacher with a master's degree. He is methodical. He thinks in systems. A man that intelligent does not show up to commit the most important crime of his life, wearing gear a teenager would reject as too cheap. I want you to flip that argument completely upside down. If you are a science teacher, someone who plans before they act, who understands cause and effect, and you are designing a crime you cannot afford to have traced back to you, what is the single most critical thing you need? You need FBI profilers to build a description of someone who is not you. If you arrive in professional tactical gear, investigators narrow their search to someone trained, resourced, and organized. So that profile eventually points towards someone like a methodical educator who thinks several steps ahead. But if you arrive in a $20 mask with a holster on backwards and a backpack that glows in the dark, those same profilers say they are looking for someone impulsive, uneducated, desperate. And they stop looking at the science teacher who had dinner with the victim 4 hours earlier. Criminal psychologists call this calculated incompetence, deliberate staging, not hiding your face behind a mask, hiding your intelligence behind a costume of stupidity. If that is what happened here, the cheap gear is not evidence of innocence. It is the most sophisticated piece of the entire operation. The belly band was not a mistake. It was a prop. The reflective strips were not an oversight. They were a costume. And here's the question that this entire case swings on. I want your honest answer in the comments right now. Was that cheap, clumsy kit genuine incompetence from a random stranger who could not afford better? Or was it a deliberate performance from someone smart enough to know that looking stupid is the best disguise available to an intelligent man? Drop team incompetence or team performance below and tell me your reasoning. This community has been split hard on this point, and I want every side heard. In February 2024, exactly 12 months before Nancy Guthrie was taken, Savannah Guthrie published a memoir titled Mostly What God Does. In it, she described a childhood family tradition they called the kidnapping game. Every summer, Cousin Terry would wake Savannah and her sister Annie before dawn and drive them from Tucson to Phoenix without telling their mother. Along the way, the girls would call Nancy from a payphone. "Mom, Cousin Terry kidnapped us." And Nancy would play along, acting horrified, promising to rescue them in a few days. A kidnapping game. From that same Tucson house. With the same Annie who now lives with Tommaso Cioni, and Nancy performing the role of the desperate mother who would do anything to get her family back. That book was available for purchase on Amazon for 2 years, before February 1st, 2026. Anyone researching this family could have read it. 1 year after it was published, the game became real. Now connect that to this. Someone in Tucson, Arizona, Googled Savannah Guthrie's NBC salary in December 2025, 2 months before the crime. And the ransom demand of $6 million did not come from guesswork. It came from someone who understood the financial architecture of this family. Someone who knew what Savannah earned, understood what leverage looked like against that number, and chose a figure that was painful but theoretically achievable. An outsider guesses, an insider calculates, and someone who has been embedded in this family for nearly 20 years has had a long time to understand both its finances and its history. Here's a layer of this investigation that deserves more attention than it has received. Tommaso Cioni plays bass in a Tucson band called Early Black. One of his bandmates is a man named Dominic Evans. Court records from Pima County show Evans has prior felony charges including burglary, robbery, theft, and embezzlement. In burglary and robbery, by definition, require entering a property that does not belong to you and taking something from the people inside it. They require a specific operational and psychological threshold that most people never cross. The Pima County Sheriff has publicly confirmed he has not ruled out accomplice involvement. The FBI confirmed 2 separate, unmatched DNA profiles. One from a glove found on the roadside less than 2 miles from Nancy's home. One from inside the home itself. They do not match each other. They do not match the family. They do not match anyone in any national database. 2 profiles, 2 locations, 2 people. If there were 2 people involved, an architect who planned and an operative who executed, the operative needed to be someone who had done this before. Someone who understood the mechanics of entering a property and leaving without visible trace. Think about this. If Tommaso was involved, Being the person on the porch himself carries enormous risk. Cameras, witnesses, physical evidence. But providing intelligence to someone else? The layout, the camera positions, the cloud subscription gap, the entry point. That is a completely different role, one that never puts you in frame. I am not stating Dominic Evans is connected to this crime. What I am stating is that Tommaso's immediate social circle includes a man with multiple felony convictions for crimes involving unauthorized entry, and the sheriff has openly said more than one person may have been involved. In an investigation this serious, that proximity does not get ignored. This is the detail that should frighten whoever is responsible, more than anything else that has been made public. For the first weeks of this investigation, everything was anchored to one window. February 1st, 9:50 p.m. to 1:47 a.m. Any suspect who planned the crime had time to build a defense around that single night. Leave your phone at home, park your car in the driveway, create a digital alibi before you go physically dark. January 23rd destroyed that entirely. The dress rehearsal was a random Tuesday night 9 days before the crime. The suspect did not know a dog would bark, did not know the footage would be posted, did not know investigators would eventually link it to February 1st. He felt invisible, which means his phone was almost certainly in his pocket that night. Registered to his name, I'm pinging cell towers every few minutes. Building a digital trail he had no reason to disguise, because he did not know anyone would ever look at it. Investigators executing what is called a tower dump are pulling records from every cell tower covering the January 23rd rehearsal location between 1 and 3 a.m. They are then overlaying that data against every device detected near Nancy's home on February 1st. They are hunting for the one phone number, one device, that appears in both datasets. 2 nights, 2 locations, 9 days apart. You can construct an alibi for the night you knew was coming. You cannot retroactively construct one for a random Tuesday you did not know was being investigated. The mask hid his face. Nothing hides the signal that was pinging from a pocket on a night the suspect thought nobody was watching. If that signal connects to a name already at the center of this investigation, every coincidence we have traced stops being a coincidence. It becomes a pattern, and patterns, in a court of law, become convictions. The $6 million ransom demand was sent to TMZ and local Arizona news outlets. Not to Savannah Guthrie, not to the family through a private channel, to the press. A professional criminal operation negotiates in private. Going public with a ransom note is not strategy. It is a liability. It invites immediate federal escalation and makes every communication traceable. The only scenario where going to the media makes sense is when the goal is not the money, when the goal is the narrative. When someone needs every headline to say outside kidnapper, and every second the world is looking outward is another second nobody is looking at the dinner table. The person who contacted TMZ used a phrase that caught investigators' attention. The main individual, not I, not the kidnapper. The main individual, language implying hierarchy, structure, layers of involvement, language that describes a role within an operation. The Bitcoin wallet has been completely silent. The FBI sent a small amount of money to it as a confirmed digital trap, monitored around the clock, waiting for a single login that would transmit an IP address and location. Nobody has touched it. A professional criminal would move that money immediately. This suspect is paralyzed, either smart enough to know it is a trap or too afraid to move. Either way, and it reveals a very specific profile. Educated enough to set up a Bitcoin wallet, knowledgeable enough to disconnect a Nest camera on schedule, but not experienced enough to understand how federal investigators close a digital trap. A science teacher knows how technology functions. A science teacher has never needed to know how the FBI closes a digital trap. I want to do something before we close. I want to lay the full picture flat and let you look at it. Who, by name, by relationship, by verified fact, had all of the following at the same time. Knowledge of Nancy's home layout, porch configuration, and camera positions, deep enough to produce subconscious ownership behavior on surveillance footage. He acknowledged that her Nest cameras had no active cloud subscription, making physical destruction of the device equal to destroying all evidence. Access to black nitrile gloves as routine professional equipment. A 10-minute drive to the crime scene. A 4-hour window on the night of the crime with no confirmed independent alibi. A confirmed presence at the crime scene's address 4 hours before the crime was committed. A financial motive rooted in a significant gap between household income and the assets surrounding a famous daughter. A published family memoir describing kidnapping games from the same address, available to anyone doing research on this family for 2 years. A bandmate with felony convictions specifically for crimes involving unauthorized entry. And now a second date, January 23rd, for which no alibi was ever thought necessary to build. That is not a list of coincidences. That is a profile. And here's what the forensic machinery is working on right now. The 2 unmatched DNA profiles are being run through genetic genealogy databases, the same process that identified the Golden State Killer. Forensic genealogists are building family trees from partial matches, tracing every branch until they converge on a name. The cell tower data from January 23rd is being overlaid against February 1st, hunting for the device that appears in both. The paper bag removed from the Cioni Guthrie home is in a federal laboratory, its contents being compared against every profile relevant to this case. The DNA does not negotiate. It does not respond to public clearances or media narratives or legal strategy. It holds whatever truth was pressed into a glove lining and against a doorframe in the dark at 2 a.m. And that truth is closer to surfacing than most people realize. When it comes, one of 2 things happens. Every thread we traced crystallizes into a pattern that was always pointing in one direction. And the question stops being who and becomes how anyone let this happen to Nancy Guthrie. Or it dissolves entirely, and a predator who is still out there watches the world finally realize it was looking at the wrong person the whole time. Either way, the answer is coming. Until then, one fact does not change. Somewhere right now, an 84-year-old woman with a pacemaker and no medication is waiting. And someone connected to this investigation knows exactly what happened on the night of January 31st. Whether that someone is a stranger no one has found yet, or the person who drove Nancy home, watched her go inside and came back 4 hours later. That is the question that will define this case. Before you go, I have one final question, and I want a real answer, not a one-word reaction. Out of everything you heard in this video, the rehearsal, the 4-hour window, the ownership behavior, the gear, the book, the bandmate, the Bitcoin silence, the cell tower trap, what is the single detail you cannot explain away? The one thing that stays with you regardless of which side you are on. Drop it in the comments and tell me why. Be specific. Because I believe this community sees things the headlines are actively missing, and I read every single comment. Subscribe. Turn on notifications. Because when this case breaks, you need to be here for it. Nancy Guthrie. Still missing. Still waiting to come home.